At the conclusion of the Greek War of Independence in 1829, a humanitarian crisis was left in its wake. American physician Samuel Gridley Howe partnered with Greece's governor Capodistrias and others to found a refugee colony in the Corinthia, which Howe named Washingtonia. The colony survived 5 years but was forgotten by 1896, when excavations of ancient Corinth began. The name and location of Washingtonia had totally disappeared. Now, decades later, a team of archaeologists and their students are retracing the steps to find Washingtonia.
Washingtonia was one of these settlements that we knew about because 20, 30 years earlier, James Wiseman had written a book called Land of the Ancient Corinthians. It's a topographic overview of the Corinthia, and he had gathered together textual evidence, he gathered together early modern literature, and he talked about this interesting colony, American colony called Washingtonia, and talked about Samuel Gridley Howe. So everybody knew about this from James Wiseman's book, published in the late 70s. And when we did our survey in the late 90s, we said, let's look for it. And Lita Georgopoulou-Gregory was interested in it, especially. She did the modern period in ECAS. And so the search for Washingtonia began then.
How he starts out actually not anywhere near Eximilia on the island of Aegina, which is a little bit of a ways away from here. And on the island, one of the things that he's doing is he's involved in the kind of a community development. He actually starts an orphanage there. Orphanage later is actually turned into a prison, but he kind of has very utopian goals and very kind of a American developmental mindset about how he's going to carry out those utopian goals in Greece. It's like 6:30 in the morning. We were doing a drone flight with Professor Sarvis, and Professor Pettigrew and Professor Corellis just wander off, and it was Rachel and Travis and myself and Professor Sarvis. We're doing a drone flight, and after we finish, Professor Corellis and Professor Pettigrew come back, and Professor Corellis has this massive ear-to-ear smile on his face, and he goes, "We found it."
We found it, I think. So this is the Brown House, right?
Mm-hmm.
Part of the Washingtonia colony. We can clearly see both sides of the isthmus. We found 2 probable sections of wall and some cut stone. It's looking very promising.
Kostis and I officially started working on this in 2016, 7 years ago, when Kostis wrote a blog post about Washingtonia.
Yeah.
His occasional blog, remember that?
Yeah.
And then you and I started talking about it.
Yeah.
And so the first time that I brought Messiah students over to the Corinthia for a 10-day period, we worked on it. It was sort of first run through Washingtonia. We had some of the source material, but we didn't know we couldn't figure out exactly where it was located. And so we couldn't improve much on James Wiseman's observation that it was probably in Eximilia. We knew it was around there.
Yeah.
And so our students started working on it in 2017. And
Yeah.
so it's been ongoing for 6 or 7 years.
I think we were the first ones, at least the Messiah students were the first ones to really collect all the letters, put them all in one hard drive, read them one summer, and get a scope of what are the, what's the evidence, the literary evidence.
I have read a lot of letters between Samuel Gridley Howe and various different people, between his father, between his friends, and I think that would have to be one of my favorite. It does, as a historian, we have to do this thing where it's like, okay, these were letters. Were they meant to be private or were they meant to be public? Did he think he was gonna eventually get these public? So you have to do how much am I actually getting? But with letters between people, we can typically assume, unless it's formal correspondence, that there's a bit of this person's mind that you don't typically get elsewhere. Same with journals. And reading Samuel Gridley Howe's letters to his father, where he talks about his, it's his divine purpose. He needs to continue what he started. And it just makes him more human in my mind.
The story of Washingtonia is so much more complicated than a single man's vision to provide a settlement for displaced refugees. It draws in narratives of the Greek War for Independence and the way that that impacted the landscape of Greece as a whole, the refugee crisis that impacted all different parts of the country, and the attempts to bring humanitarian aid, often with other political motives, from a variety of countries beyond just the US. And then we're also going to try to dive into why Americans, including Howe, rooted their identity so strongly in Greece, especially with their classical heritage and Athenian democracy, and why that really motivated Americans to try to support Greece, even though the United States government never officially joined the war.
One of the key questions is what happens to the settlement after Howe leaves, and what happens to the settlement before Howe founds it. So there's a number of increasingly complicated agents and players who are emerging from the sources, whom we don't know as well, because Howe is the star of the story, because it is his letters that we have. And the reason why we have them is because his daughter was in 1908, like almost half a century afterwards, was very concerned about publishing, right? So we have an overrepresentation of Howe's leadership, which may be still there, but it may be complicated by other assistants, some of whom are named in the letters and some of them are not. So we're discovering who are the others from the Greek government side, other Americans who came and joined him, his assistants, school teachers that taught at the school that were trained in England, Italian agriculturalists who showed up and gave him advice. This whole set of characters that is getting to be about a handful. It's really quite interesting.
I'd say about 80% of the places, 80% of the places that are on the map, we found physical remains that correspond pretty well
Exactly.
to what we might expect.
Yeah.
And I think the best example of that is the house of Samuel Gridley Howe, and Howe occupied the house of the Ottoman governor before him. He repairs it, and Finley occupies it after him. And so there we've got roof tiles, we have clear walls, we have pottery, we have glass, we have a building.
Yeah.
And a building that's been abandoned for quite a long time.
And we also feel that we want to tell the world of our methodology and the combination of real inspection and digital manipulation, because we think it's quite innovative, and I think it also reflects the kind of projects that the students have done that seem to be quite diverse, from photographing pottery to digitizing maps to flying drones, walking around inspecting, so it's all of these fragmented pieces that once you layer them up on top of one another, that's where the story comes in, and that I think is a model for how to do 19th century archaeology.
It's exciting for me to show people, sort of step them through, exactly replicate what we did in the field. The combination of the research that Dr. Pettigrew did to find historic maps, historic aerial photos from the American School in Greece, pulled into a field map that we could use on our mobile devices. So by combining all that information, doing some sort of remote reconnaissance work, if you will, looking at the evidence in those old data sets, we're able to direct ourselves to where we thought things were going to be using the mobile app. And when we get there, literally the funny story is, they touched the spot where they thought it was going to be. It sent them directly to Google Maps and directed them. You have arrived. They step out, and there's what they've been looking for who knows how many years. This idea of experiential learning, getting to go out and do these sorts of things in the field. The students that got that experience, I don't hesitate to say it's life-changing. It is, you're seeing new cultures, you're seeing history of a different culture combined with our own in this particular case, right? Our own, U.S. history in terms of the work that was done. But I want to stress that experiential learning and students getting the opportunity to be involved in this, I will, again, love to go back next summer. but we don't always take students. And really, at the end of the day, it's exciting for me, but the biggest reward is to actually have other students experience these things, get excited about the kind of work we did, be able to talk about it, and have it be part of what made them who they are when they graduate.
As far as GIS is concerned, if you look at like the steps of GIS, the first step is going to be like collecting your data or gathering your data, and normally that's going to be downloading it from a source, but in this case, a lot of our data we're actually like in the field collecting, which isn't always as common, but I guess it's much more practical with this project because we don't have a lot of that aerial imagery on high resolution. So we can take like the base maps that are in here that are built in across like the world, but it's not as high resolution, so the drones will help us later in the project to develop like and make sure that our distinctions in the agriculture are more accurate than what we're doing now, because right now we're going off much lower resolution. And then if you go back to the 1940s stuff with the British or German aerial stuff, that's even lower resolution. You can barely tell what it is, but we'll basically be able to tell like how much of the land has changed into just agricultural use.
So we're flying, go into all the details of the models and all that, but we're flying a drone that has a 20 megapixel 4K video camera mounted on it. That camera is pointed straight down, which is what we call a nadir image, named after a French balloonist who took the first straight down photos for mapping and for just observation. But that camera on the drone flies a pre-planned mission back and forth across an area with a heavy amount of overlap between every individual image. And then we process all that into using software that produces what we call an aerial mosaic. And that is a large area, in this particular case something like 15 to 20 acres in one flight, that produces a realistic view straight down of that particular area that we're focused on. The difference here is that, Google Maps or Bing Maps or whatever you happen to use, on the web, those aerial photos, if you're lucky, have been taken by low altitude aircraft. If you're not so lucky, it's more satellite imagery or high altitude aircraft. So in that area, the data we had, you couldn't make out much detail on the ground at all. And by flying at 300-400 feet with that particular drone, taking those overlaid images, to make a long story short, we get an image that has a resolution of about 2 inches per pixel. So you can zoom in and see a lot of detail, a lot more detail than anything they had before.
Anastasios Tsingos who was kind of collected in his book the histories of the village, is our kind of resident representative of local history. So he lives here. He's a great partner. We've never met him, so it was nice to see that he's not only incredibly smart and scholarly, but he's also super generous and friendly collaborator. So it was wonderful to show him something he didn't know in his backyard, in return to all the things that he's shown us through his literature of the late 19th century, landscape and names and toponyms and family histories. And so it's a little bit of an interesting circle, because everything he knows about the antiquity of his village comes from David and other scholars like David, but he's giving us things that we have not looked at because we are not so much focused on the village today, and then ultimately we give something back to him. So he can, yeah.
Από τον παππού μου, που γράφει πολλά ονόματα θέσεων στα εξαμίλια. Θέσεων που τώρα δεν υπάρχουν. Δεν χρησιμοποιούνται πια. We don't call these places using the old names.
Yeah. See, I find that fascinating too, the toponyms, because they do change over time, but there's some that still stay, and people don't know why. They like nosocomio. When they told me, he didn't know why.
Perhaps our discovery of Washingtonia, at least the location of it, might be in, we can dream a little. Might be the beginning of of 100 years of modern, contemporary 19th century archaeology here.
So you get back, you have that exciting moment during the summer, and you have that time, and you make the discovery, and you're in the field. The really hard part of any kind of archaeological work is going from that moment to turning that conversation and that discovery into historical knowledge, to first of all, getting it in front of audiences, getting the information out there, and then moving it from an initial statement in a conference paper, for example, to a published form. And that requires a lot of work. You have to read the primary, all the primary material that's available to make sense of discovery of a material context. You have to incorporate it into conversations among historians, archaeologists, and other scholars. It's very easy, and this is a common problem for archaeologists, to simply never publish it. They have the discovery, but because the discovery requires interpretation, it requires hard work to figure out the meaning, the result never gets published. I think in our case, we are in a good position because we felt that with the discovery of particular physical places and the recognition that they corresponded to information that we had from our 19th century texts, that was really a final piece for us in being able to make an argument in press. We submitted an abstract to the Archaeological Institute of America's, the annual meeting. That's the big meeting for many archaeologists working in America, especially in the part of the world that we're working, the Mediterranean. So it's an opportunity to simply show up and present the discovery, talk about our method, and see how people respond.
There are different communities that I'm realizing that are interested in. Of course, it's the general community of Americans who are very much involved in issues of America's role in the world historically, particularly America's role in the world in a humanitarian way. So we're excited to share with them a story that becomes better known for America's activities in the 20th century as opposed to the 19th. Remember, America in 1829 is a very isolated place. It's just won its independence. It doesn't have much of a global presence. So we're excited to share with the general public that there was this kind of ground-up swelling of support for something that happened very far away across over the Mediterranean, funded entirely by citizens without the government, without military, without any other kind of super agency, and having it succeed and in some way kind of provide a model for later engagements. So that's the sort of the public side that I think we're really excited to share with.
I think for me as an American student who's very excited to have their very first adventure into archaeology in another country, I came at it from a very American-centric perspective. I was very much impressed by the amount of work an American had done in Greece, and I saw it very much as an example of the way that American politics and efforts have impacted another part of the world. But upon having time to reflect, I've realized that I needed to devote a lot more attention to the Greek side of the story, because at the end of the day, this is a Greek story. And as an outsider, I need to take a step back and really try to listen to the sources of the source community itself. And the story that I will be able to tell about Washingtonia, the story that we will all be able to tell about Washingtonia, is at the end of the day a very limited perspective and will be a small piece in the broader mosaic that I hope scholarship will continue to build about this colony.
I think, especially with someone who had such a public-facing life as William Gridley Howe, and who has done so much in Greece, and we're making a public-facing project that hopefully the people of Greece and people all over the world will be able to use to learn about this person who's not often talked about outside of Greece. It's this balance of presenting what we find, warts and all, with all of the good and the bad attached, while also trying our best as people not to let our biases slip in. We all have biases. Historians will have biases no matter what. And there's a story here of just an American coming across what they view, well, it was a problem. The Greeks were suffering. But American coming across a problem and wanting to fix it. And this is a theme we see all over history. And sometimes people believe that the American intervention fixed it, and other times people believe that it just kind of messed everything up more. So there's this really careful balance that us as historians need to take when presenting this information, of not feeding into either of those preconceived notions and just presenting the facts and letting other people make their own informed opinions from what we put forward. I also think something that is beneficial on the project that we're working on is the last chapter of the story map, which is about like our findings. There's not a lot that we get to be like, oh, this was good or bad. It's like, here's what happened. And so we have a little less of an issue with that chapter, but when we talk about the life and some of the social history that we're talking about in Washingtonia, it is definitely going to have to be a balance of like, okay, here are the facts. How do we present the truth, the good and the bad, without leaning into one bias or another?
It's wonderful to reflect on the impact that it had on students who had no idea what they were getting into. So for whom this is a radical shift. For David and I, this is what we do. Like, we are used to going to Greece every summer and teaching about it. But also there's this sort of intergenerational dimension now, because I'm thinking that I didn't bring any students with me this last summer, but as I do the responsibilities of my job, teaching history of architecture and first-year seminars, I have been slowly talking about students, the work that we did, and I've seen their eyes light up. Generations of students don't get to see, because they have that sort of golden moment where they put their resources in coming for that one summer. But then there's another crop of students and another crop of students. So there's a certain joy in seeing that intergenerational continuity. And that one place, just an ordinary place in the middle of rural Greece, can be shared and can provide inspiration for students that come from all walks of life, from all parts of the U.S. or even not the U.S. and abroad, and have it generate something completely different for their future.
We feel that this particular project has a lot of public value, and we think that people are going to be interested in the nature of the story itself, the public part of the story, because we're talking about the very beginnings of modern Greece. We are talking about refugee settlements, which is a big topic of conversation in the 21st century, given all that is going on in the world. We are talking about a very important, two or three very important people in European and American circles, one being the famous physician Samuel Gridley Howe in his younger days, one being the governor of Greece, Capodistrius. George Finley is significant. So this is a project, a collaborative project at the start of the Greek state between people from different countries and different backgrounds. And so we want to tell this story in a public way. And we want people to know about this story, given that we recently commemorated the 200-year anniversary of the start of the Greek Revolution. And so we think that people will be interested in this for all kinds of reasons.
Whenever we were out there, we kept discovering other modern elements.
Yeah.
Right? We World War II, earlier Greek fortifications and encampments on the isthmus, and so there are all these other stories that could be told.
Yeah, and these are the sites, these are the areas, yes, you might say American archaeology or historical archaeology in the States, it does Native American sites, but in its historical phase, it looks at a lot of 18th century battle sites or churches and cemeteries and new colonies, because it doesn't have antiquity, which is not quite true, but whereas Greece has all this antiquity, so people just go to their the early origins. I think we do want to argue that there's benefit in looking at the 19th century with an archaeological lens and not ignoring it because there is this other golden period. And perhaps the 19th century is a golden period and will be a golden period in the future, and we won't know, we can't tell how scholarship will evolve, but I have a suspicion that the monopoly or the absolute focus on antiquity is going to slowly be devised a little bit, And we might be at the forefront of something. I don't know.
Could be.
Yes. So therefore, that discovery is more exciting and in really creating a new chapter in archaeology.